Amityville, Murders, Curse, and Eternal Terror. Discover the dark secrets of the most cursed house in history. At 3:15 a.m., an icy silence blanketed the small town of Amityville. It was the kind of stillness that seems to warn of something terrible. Inside a house on Ocean Avenue, 23-year-old Ronald DeFeo Jr. moved through the darkened rooms. In his hands was a .35 caliber rifle, heavy but steady. Without hesitation, he shot his parents, brothers, and sisters one by one. What was most puzzling was the silence. None of the victims stirred or tried to escape. Later, police confirmed that neighbors, despite the quiet night, hadn't heard a single shot. How could that be? DeFeo confessed quickly, but his explanation was as disturbing as the murders themselves. He claimed to hear voices, whispers commanding him, as if the house had a will of its own. It marked the beginning of a legend, one that would turn that address into far more than a site of tragedy. Amityville was no longer just a house. It became a symbol, a mystery that still makes us question the boundaries between human evil and the supernatural. The DeFeo murders. When evil is revealed, at first glance, the DeFeo family's story seemed like a typical American tale from the 1970s. They lived in a spacious house at 112 Ocean Avenue, nestled in a quiet neighborhood in Amityville, New York. The residence, with its imposing facade and iconic half-moon windows, radiated an aura of success. But behind closed doors, the atmosphere was anything but harmonious. Ronald DeFeo Jr., the eldest son, was in constant conflict with his father, Ronald Sr., a man notorious for his explosive temper. Their arguments were frequent and heated, fueled by years of emotional and physical abuse. Adding to the chaos, Butch, as Ronald Jr., was nicknamed, struggled with drug addiction, and engaged in criminal activity, further fracturing the family dynamic. On the night of November 13th, 1974, everything changed. Ronald Jr. made a decision that would haunt history. Armed with a Marlin rifle, he entered his parents' bedroom while they slept soundly. Without hesitation, he shot them both. The impact was fatal. Ronald Sr. died instantly, as did his wife, Louise. Without a pause or a trace of remorse, Ronald moved to the bedrooms of his siblings. Dawn, Allison, Mark, and John Matthew, aged 9 to 18, were asleep. One by one, he executed them. The precision was chilling. All were found lying face down, as if they never realized what was happening. When police arrived the following morning after a call from Ronald himself, claiming to have discovered his family dead, the scene was horrifying. Blood soaked the mattresses, walls, and floors. But what puzzled investigators even more was the silence. How had none of the victims reacted? And how had the neighbors, despite the stillness of the night, heard nothing? Not even the blasts of a high-powered rifle. Ronald's confession only deepened the mystery. He claimed that voices in the house had urged him to commit the murders. These voices, he said, were impossible to ignore, as though they were part of his own mind. Police and prosecutors attributed the crime to psychological issues and drug abuse, but for those fascinated by the supernatural, Ronald's account hinted at something far more sinister. Sentenced to 6 consecutive life terms, Ronald's narrative shifted repeatedly over the years. At one point, he claimed his sister Dawn had helped him commit the murders, and that killing her was an act of self-defense. At other times, he said he remembered nothing, as if possessed. Regardless of the truth, one thing was certain. The tragedy left an indelible scar. The Amityville house, once an ordinary home, was now steeped in blood and shrouded in mystery, bearing the weight of 6 lives cut short. The crime could have been just another terrible chapter in American history, but what followed would transform Amityville into something far greater than a family tragedy. It became the epicenter of a phenomenon that blurred the lines between reality and imagination. The arrival of the Lutz family, when terror takes shape. In the winter of 1975, just over a year after the DeFeo murders, George and Kathy Lutz moved into the Amityville house with their 3 children. To them, the mansion seemed like a dream come true. A spacious home with charming architecture at an unbelievably low price. But, as the saying goes, if something seems too good to be true, it probably is. From the very first day, small events began to stir an uneasy feeling. George, a pragmatic and skeptical man, started to notice an unshakable chill in the house, even when the fireplace was roaring. He also began waking up every night at exactly 3:15 a.m., the same time the murders had occurred. Kathy, meanwhile, detected an inexplicable odor that would come and go, no matter how obsessively she cleaned the house. One night, as she checked on her sleeping children, she swore she saw a dark figure standing at the foot of one of their beds. The children themselves began reporting strange occurrences. The youngest claimed to have an imaginary friend, whom he described as a shadowy figure with glowing red eyes. He insisted his friend lives here, in the basement. The intensity of these supernatural events escalated with each passing day. George became withdrawn, obsessively performing strange rituals, while Kathy claimed to feel invisible hands touching her. One day, while cleaning the kitchen, she noticed claw marks etched into the wall, as if some wild animal had passed through. But the breaking point came with the basement. Suspicious of the strange atmosphere surrounding the area, George decided to investigate further. Behind a false wall, he discovered a small, red-painted room. The space reeked of a nauseating, inexplicable odor. Some claimed it was where Ronald DeFeo Jr. had spent much of his time listening to the voices. Soon, the house's atmosphere became unbearable. George and Kathy argued constantly, a behavior uncharacteristic of their relationship. Objects began moving on their own. Doors slammed violently, and the sound of footsteps echoed through the house in the dead of night. The final straw occurred on the 28th night. George woke to a deafening noise outside the house. When he opened the door, he found deep gouges in the ground, as if something massive had moved through the yard. Inside, Kathy screamed as she saw her reflection in the mirror, her face grotesquely disfigured for a few seconds before returning to normal. Without taking even half their belongings, the Lutz family fled the house that same night. They never returned, but they never stayed silent either. By sharing their experiences with the media and collaborating with writers, the Lutzes gave rise to the infamous story of the Amityville horror. However, not everyone believed them. Paranormal investigators claimed the house harbored something sinister, while skeptics accused the Lutzes of fabricating everything for financial gain. What is truth and what is fiction? That may never be fully answered. But one thing is undeniable. The Lutz family's story turned Amityville into a horror icon, a house that seems to embody fear in its purest form. Myth or reality? The fine line between the supernatural and fraud. The Amityville story quickly gained traction. Journalists, paranormal investigators, and even filmmakers became captivated by what the Lutz family claimed to have experienced. Yet, while many were convinced the house was truly cursed, others wasted no time in questioning the validity of their accounts. Ed and Lorraine Warren, renowned paranormal investigators, were called to examine the house. During their investigation, Lorraine claimed to have felt an overwhelming demonic presence. They captured what would become an iconic photograph, the image of a boy with glowing eyes, allegedly the spirit of one of the DeFeo victims. For supernatural enthusiasts, this was undeniable evidence. On the other hand, skeptics pointed out numerous inconsistencies in the Lutz's accounts. For instance, structural experts examined the basement but found no traces of the odors or claw marks described. Additionally, there had been no reports of supernatural activity before the Lutz family moved in. A more contentious issue was the financial aspect of the Lutz's story. Shortly after fleeing the house, they sold the rights to their experiences, which were adapted into a best-selling book and later a film. This raised suspicions that the Amityville horror might have been a calculated attempt to capitalize on fear. George Lutz, however, consistently defended their claims, maintaining that everything they described was true. "We didn't leave because of debts or personal problems. We left because we feared for our lives," he stated in an interview years later. Parapsychological studies conducted by other researchers yielded inconclusive results. Some suggested the house displayed signs of residual energy, but nothing that could explain the magnitude of the events reported. Others theorized that the traumatic history of the DeFeo murders could have influenced the family's perceptions. The controversy deepened further with comments from William Weber, Ronald DeFeo Jr., his attorney. He alleged that he had collaborated with the Lutz family to embellish parts of their story in an effort to attract publicity to his client's case. It was all a scheme to make money, Weber claimed, though George and Kathy Lutz always denied any such conspiracy. Despite the contradictions, Amityville remained firmly embedded in the public imagination as a symbol of supernatural terror. The events described may have been exaggerated, but something about the house, whether its tragic history, imposing appearance, or the emotions it evoked, continued to draw the curious and the devoted. Skepticism, however, did little to diminish the narrative's impact. Many prefer to believe in the unexplainable as it satisfies one of humanity's deepest emotional needs, the fear of the unknown. It's this duality, the desire for answers and the fascination with unanswered questions, that keeps Amityville a mystery that refuses to fade. While some walk away convinced it was an elaborate hoax, others see the Lutz story as proof of forces beyond human understanding. Either way, Amityville endures as an enigma, not just as a physical location, but as a reflection of the shadows within our own minds. The fear that never leaves the Amityville case is more than a story of crime and paranormal phenomena. It has become a mirror for our deepest fears: the unknown, the unexplainable, and the uncontrollable. Whether you believe the Lutz family's accounts or not, the impact of this story transcends the facts. Amityville forces us to reflect on how places can carry the weight of traumatic events. Can evil truly seep into a physical space? Or is the human mind the real source of these horrors, projecting our inner demons onto environments already scarred by tragedy? The answer might depend on what we choose to believe. To skeptics, Amityville is a mix of real tragedy and financial opportunism, a family destroyed by a heinous crime, and another that saw a way to turn fear into profit. But to supernatural enthusiasts, Amityville is living proof that evil exists and isn't confined to books or movie screens. It's impossible to ignore how stories like this shape our collective imagination. Movies, documentaries, and books have cemented the house's fame, turning it into almost a character of its own. Amityville has become a metaphor for the unknown, a symbol of what we avoid confronting, the fragility of our safety, and the unsettling reality that evil can emerge in unexpected ways. Perhaps the most terrifying element of this story is how it connects us to the idea that fear, ultimately, is deeply personal. It can be triggered by a house, a legend, or even a lingering doubt. Ronald DeFeo Jr. claimed to hear voices. The Lutzes felt invisible presences. And as we hear these stories, we feel that chill down our spines because something within us recognizes that the unexplainable both fascinates and terrifies us. The house at 112 Ocean Avenue has changed hands many times over the decades. None of the new owners have reported supernatural phenomena, but the stigma remains. Even with its exterior altered and its address changed, people still visit, seeking something, a shadow, a sensation, any trace of the terror that once lived there. In the end, perhaps Amityville's true curse isn't in the house itself, but in our need to comprehend the incomprehensible. It forces us to confront the possibility that some things may never be explained. And that's what makes Amityville so unsettling. It isn't just a ghost story or a terrible crime. It's a reminder that true fear doesn't come from the supernatural. It comes from what it reveals about ourselves. What would you do if it were you in that house? And more importantly, how would you know when it's time to leave?